Ukraine has pledged to locate the Russian soldiers who are responsible for the apparent killing of an unarmed Ukrainian prisoner of war. Late in the day, on Monday, President Volodymyr Zelensky made the statement, "We will locate the murderers." The Ukrainian soldier can be seen in the footage smoking a cigarette while he is stationed in a trench before he is shot multiple times with automatic weapon. He shouts glory to Ukraine. The identity of the soldier has not been made public at this time. However, journalists have spoken to a relative who claims to have recognized him. A woman who claimed to be the soldier's sister stated that my brother would most definitely be capable of maintaining his ground against the Russians in such a manner in his entire existence. He never once concealed the truth, and he would never do so in the presence of his adversaries. It has been established by journalists that the soldier was a member of the 30th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. After the prisoner of war, Pau is shot dead. One of the shooters, believed to be a Russian soldier, can be heard on the video stating "die" and using an expletive. This can be heard in the footage. It has not been determined who the purported murderer or killers are, despite the fact that they are not seen in the location of the filming as well as the time it took place have not been confirmed by the BBC on Monday. It was first brought to light on social media. Russia has not provided any statement since President Vladimir Putin began his full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev and its Western allies have accused Russian forces of committing mass atrocities during the. Russia has stated that these accusations are false. Ukrainian soldier castrated. In his video message, President Zelensky stated that the occupiers were responsible for the death of a warrior who courageously said to their faces, "Glory to Ukraine." I want all of us to respond to his remarks collectively and in unison by saying, "Glory to the hero." All praise and honor to the warriors. Praise be to the Ukrainians. Mr. Zelensky was referring to a rallying chant used by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, which has gained widespread recognition among millions of Ukrainians. Dmitry Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, tweeted that the video was another evidence this was genocidal and demanded that the International Criminal Court conduct an immediate investigation. Dmitry Luz, the human rights ombudsman accused Russian forces of conducting war crimes by violating the Geneva Conventions regarding the treatment of POWs. He stated that these violations constitute crimes against humanity. In addition, Andrei Kostin, the general prosecutor of Ukraine, stated that a criminal investigation had already been initiated. In the past, Ukraine has leveled allegations of war crimes against Russia, specifically accusing Russian soldiers of torturing, raping, and killing Ukrainian prisoners of war. In July of 2018, a video was released showing a kidnapped Ukrainian soldier being castrated in the Russian-occupied Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. The region is located in the southeast corner of. The Russian soldier who was recorded carrying out the assault in the town of Sevlons has been identified as a member of a squad that belongs to Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechen people. In the month of November, Moscow leveled accusations that Ukrainian troops had murdered a number of Russian prisoners. It came after a video from the front line in eastern Ukraine appeared online, showing what appeared to be the surrender of several soldiers during an incident that resulted in their fatal. An official from the Ukrainian government stated that the surrender was a staged event that was carried out by Russian soldiers in an effort to attack their captors. Important choice from Volodymyr Zelensky. Alexander Yaka, the deputy chief of the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, along with several other executives, were fired by Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of. The decrees that Zelensky signed and published on the website of the Ukrainian presidency state that Jakoshev, the head of the Economic Support Department, Alexander Provov and IG Orozko, the head of the state's Secret Protection and Licensing Department, have been removed from their respective positions after Zelensky relieved Boris Bazruki of his responsibilities as head of the SBU Zapia Department and Eduard Fedorov of his duties as head of the SBU Sumy Department. Oleg Skapa was designated as the new head of the Sumy Department. Oleg Krama was given the role of leading the SBU Department of State Secret Protection and Licensing after being nominated by Zelensky. The Ukrainian military has no intention of surrendering the Bakhmut to Russian, according to statements made by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The military operations to protect the besieged eastern city of Bakhmut will continue to receive support from senior generals in light of the fact that Russian forces are drawing closer to the city. Analysts from the West speculated over the weekend that Ukraine was probably pulling back some of its soldier. Moscow has been making efforts to capture Bakhmut for several months, despite the fact that both parties are suffering heavy casualties in the protracted war of attrition. According to a local authority, there has been fighting in the streets in the recent days, days. Alexander Marchenko, the city's deputy mayor, stated over the weekend that Russia had not yet taken possession of the city. In the meantime, Yevgeny Prin, the head of the Wagner private army that is participating in the Russian, has expressed frustration over a lack of ammunition in the midst of what appears to be friction between his fighters and regular Russian forces. He is making an effort to take the city of Bakhmut from the Russian commander. In addition to that, he claims that his representative was denied entry into a Russian military headquarters. According to analysts, Bakhmut does not have much value from a strategic stand. However, it has become a focal point for Russian commanders who have been having trouble communicating any encouraging news to the Kremlin. The conquest of the city would move Russia a little bit closer to its objective of controlling the entirety of the Donetsk region. The Donetsk region was one of the 4 regions in eastern and southern Ukraine that Russia annexed in September of last year. Following fraudulent referendums that were widely condemned outside of Russia, Zelensky has the backing of Ukrainian command. During his nighttime address, Mr. Zelensky mentioned that he had a conversation about Bakhmut with senior generals. He stated that the enemy's response was not to retreat, but rather to strengthen our defenses. This viewpoint was supported without dissent by the entire command. There was not any other available opportunity. I instructed the commander-in-chief to locate the appropriate troops in order to assist our guys who were located in. The comments were made in response to a report that was published in the German newspaper Bild. The report stated, citing sources within the Ukrainian government, that the commander of the armed forces, Valery Zany, had disagreed with Mr. Zelensky about the operation a few weeks earlier and recommended a retreat from the city. According to the publication, the majority of defenders agreed with Gen Zane's viewpoint. The Institute for the Study of, which is based in the United States, stated over the weekend that it was likely that Ukrainian troops were conducting a limited fighting withdrawal, while at the same time continuing to inflict high casualties on the Russians during a visit to the front line. On Sunday, the commander of the ground forces, Andriy SKY, was interviewed by the Ukrainska Pravda newspaper. He stated that the level of tension in the fighting in Bakhmut had reached its highest. The adversary has been throwing additional Wagner troops into the battle. He said, "We have been holding our own. Our troops have been valiantly defending our positions in the north of Bakhmut. In an effort to prevent the city from being encircled, it is very difficult to survive in Bakhmut. The lives of the few remaining residents in the city of Bakhmut are extremely challenging. People who are affected by electricity outages are fighting to maintain their quality. At the same time that ditches are being dug into the entrance roads of the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, which is besieged by Russia, the city's surviving few civilians are having a difficult time making ends meet. Humanitarian aid is being distributed by different volunteers to civilians taking refuge in shelter centers who are attempting to survive in the midst of power outages. The Ukrainian army increased its exercise. When they are not on the front lines, soldiers who are fighting in areas of Ukraine where conflicts are still ongoing receive training in gun shooting. This training takes place in different regions of Ukraine. The Regional Defense Brigade of the Ukrainian Army, which is currently stationed on the Zap Persian front, sends a portion of its soldiers away from the front each morning to take part in various combat training programs. During the exercise that was carried out on the Zipo front, journalists with the special authorization of the Ukrainian Armed Forces recorded the shooting activities of Ukrainian soldiers using a variety of weapons manufactured in the United States 3 times a week. Soldiers in the Regional Defense Brigade participate in combat training that is very comparable to what they will encounter in the field. This helps them learn how to use a variety of weapons. During the course of their combat training, the soldiers that have congregated in this sector of the front are practicing counterattack and eliminating the enemy's representative. Although the majority of the soldiers taking part in the training have already been deployed to the front lines for several months, new candidates are training alongside more experienced soldiers. In order to get ready for deployment, Russia suffered a loss of 155,490 fighter. The Russian force that invaded Ukraine suffered heavy casualties, both in terms of personnel and equipment, on the very first day of the conflict, which began on February 24, 2022, and lasted until March 7, 2023. As the first year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine came to a close, the Kremlin suffered increasing military casualties, which continue to mount on a daily basis. 155,490 military personnel, 3,441 tanks, 6,725 armored personnel vehicles, 2,479 artillery systems, 256 anti-aircraft systems, 304 warplanes, 289 helicopters, 1,104 unmanned aerial vehicles, 873 cruise missiles, 18 more, 5,323 military vehicles. According to the data that was shared by the Ukrainian General Staff, 464 toddlers were murdered in Russia. Russia is responsible for the deaths of 464 toddlers in Ukraine. According to a statement released this morning by the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, the Russian aggression resulted in the injury or death of more than 1,395 children across the entirety of the. According to the official data of the prosecutors of the Juvenile Division, 464 children have lost their lives and 931 children have been injured, as stated in the statement that was made by the Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. On the other hand, it was pointed out in the statement that the number of children who were hurt was significantly higher than the announced number, as the data in the areas that were still under Russian occupation and the conflicts continued. This was because of the fact that the conflict continue. Allegation of murder coming from Russia. According to the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, an assassination attempt on Russian industrialist Konstantin Malefev by the Ukrainian intelligence service was foiled. Malef was the target of the plot. The Federal Security Service FFSB provided some information about the particulars of the attempted assassination in the statement that Denis Kapin, a 39-year-old Russian citizen living in Ukraine, acting under the control of the Ukrainian Security Service and fighting against Russian troops, said the statement. Malef is the chairman of Sarah Company and the owner of Sarah Television Channel. An attempt to kill him was thwarted. It was discovered that he was the mastermind behind the criminal enter. It was stated in the statement that the assassination was planned by placing explosives under Malefev's car, and that a lawsuit was filed against Kapin under the articles of the Russian Penal Code titled Act of Terrorism, Participation in the Activities of a Terrorist Organization, and Illegal Explosive Smuggling. The statement also stated that the lawsuit was filed under the articles of the Russian Penal Code titled Illegal Explosive. In addition to this, the statement suggested that Kapin was responsible for organizing and taking part in the assaults that took place on Thursday in the Brains region of Russia. Statement issued by Moscow. Maria Zakar, the spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was quoted as saying the following: "The failed assassination attempt on Malefev is another example of the extremely murderous nature of the Kiev regime, which uses terrorist methods to suppress the opposition and commits heinous atrocities against the representative of the media world." Malefev is a representative of the media world. In August of 2022, Ukrainian militants used a similar plot to blow up a vehicle while carrying out an act of sabotage in Daria, Doug, a journalist who worked in Russia, was brutally put to death as a direct consequence of this terrorist act. Next big news just dropped. There are many important factors that determine the value of the destroyed target. The operations of the Ukrainian army continue on. In the operations organized, many targets belonging to the Russian army are destroyed. At many points, the work of the Russian army, whose unity is disrupted by the operations organized by the Ukrainian army, is becoming more and more difficult. The cornered Russian army has little idea what to do. Let's take a look at the operations carried out by the Ukrainian troops against strategic points of the Russian army. The loss of military personnel is approaching 155,000, while the loss of equipment and vehicles is also increased, as the Ukrainian army's operations are gradually expanding to warehouses, logistics lines, and military bases inside Russia's borders. Russia's losses will only increase. The operation against the Air Jet base was the signal for this and proved that the Ukrainian army will continue inside Russia's border. The Ukrainian army is destroying strategic Russian targets in the occupied territories in order to remove the Russian occupation forces inside Ukraine as soon as possible. Ammunition, depots, and logistics centers of the Russian occupation forces are targeted by the Ukrainian army. We knew that Russian soldiers are struggling with many problems, such as hunger, thirst, lack of equipment, and medicine at the same. According to the developments, these problems have reached such a level that Russian soldiers are now fighting with shovels. Russia, the so-called superpower of the world, cannot provide ammunition to its soldiers. It cannot supply its soldiers with ammunition, nor can it protect the warehouses it has established in the regions that occupies and the logistics centers that deliver to these warehouses. The claim that Ukraine destroyed a Russian warehouse came from the city of Zev. Recently, images of a warehouse in Zizia burning down was shared on social media. According to local media, these images are of a warehouse belonging to the Russian army, the Poi district. The Zizia is under Russian occupation. Ukrainian insurgents are allegedly behind the operation against the warehouse. The recent attack on the Air Jet base shows that Ukraine has and will continue to push forward its plans for operations against strategic targets. In the same minutes that the Air base was hit, Ukrainian armed special forces were destroying another military target in another location. The night of the offensive was one of the most memorable nights in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Ukrainian Army Special Forces conducted a night hunt in the direction of 6 Russian tanks, probably out of fuel and stranded in the forest, were destroyed by the Special Forces operation. The destruction of 6 tanks in one night reveals the weakness of the Russian army. Images of the operation were published on a Twitter account of the Ukrainian Army Special Forces. By publishing these images, Ukrainian army shows the Russian occupiers what will happen if the occupation. The Russian army thought that it could discourage the Ukrainian army from resistance by organizing large-scale operations, relying on its large population and the number of troops available. Russia predicted a simple victory by massing all its means. The fact that Ukraine's population and troops were smaller than Russia's was one of the factors that encouraged Russia, but war is not always a game won by superior. The Ukrainian army bases its battle plan on small but highly effective attacks. The Russian army moves with a general offensive, leaving the front line undefended. Ukrainian army units repelled Russian attacks with guerrilla warfare, while destroying strategic targets left behind the front lines by Russia. As a result, Russian troops on the offensive against Ukraine are deprived of support. Just when the logistics centers in the Khan region was one of the most important Russian ammunition depots destroyed by Ukraine. With the operation, the communication and logistics center of the Russian army was destroyed. This operation has two different important dimensions. First of all, this operation destroyed the base where the Russian army was harboring the needs of the Russian troops trying to advance into Ukraine. These expectations of the soldiers waiting for resupply were in vain. Secondly, this operation dealt a major blow to the communication networks of the Russian army. The Russian army was having communication problems even before the communication centers were hit. This communication problem, which was more than technical, was the problem of unhealthy communication between soldiers, and so much so that there was big differences between the orders given by the commanders and the actions of the soldiers. This problem doubled the destruction of the communication center. The communication problem of Russian soldiers who already communicate in an unhealthy way will grow even more. This logistics and communication center in Kherson was one of the main refueling depots of the Russian army as a result of the operation carried out by the Ukrainian southern operations. These depots are no longer supplying fuel to Russian vehicles. So what happens to the Russian soldiers who are deprived of support inside Ukraine? At this point, Russian soldiers are faced with two options: either surrender and seek refuge with Ukrainian army, or face the same fate that 150,000 Russian soldiers have already suffered. Soldiers who choose to seek refuge in the Ukrainian army are taken out of the war with their humanitarian needs, but those who continue fighting face a sad end. In fact, the Ukrainian army's operation technique is quite clear. First, Russian soldiers are allowed to advance on the Ukrainian army. Then a war of attrition is waged against the Russian soldiers. While the war of attrition continues, important shipping points, ammunition, depots, and supply lines of the Russian army are destroyed. The Russian soldiers, deprived of any possible, lose ammunition and start to experience food and drink shortages in their clashes with the Ukrainian army. At this point, they are faced with the aforementioned options: surrender or die. The Ukrainian army is aware that the Russian army is just a dysfunctional crowd. Therefore, it prevents Russia from recovering by eliminating the factors that can make the crowd functional at the same. Ukrainian army is trying to establish psychological superiority over the Russian army through strategic operations. As the psychological superiority develops day by day in favor of Ukraine, the process of withdrawal and surrender of Russian soldiers who do not want to fight is accelerating. While all this is happening, it is also useful to know Russia's latest losses. According to the latest updated, the Russian army lost 153,770 military personnel, 3,423 tanks, 6,703 armored vehicles, 2,086 drones, 5,307 fuel tanks, and 250 air defense systems.